The grandeur of the Roman Empire wasn't built solely on the shoulders of disciplined soldiers or the tactical brilliance of its commanders on the battlefield. Behind every resounding victory, every conquest that stretched from the misty highlands of Britain to the scorching sands of the Nubian desert lay a silent yet extraordinarily efficient machinery. The most sophisticated military logistics system the ancient world had ever witnessed. Without this invisible network of supply and support, no campaign, however ingeniously conceived, could have succeeded. Rome grasped a fundamental truth that countless previous empires had ignored to their catastrophic detriment. Armies don't march on glory alone, nor can they survive on courage and discipline without sustenance. When legions marched for months through hostile territories, when they maintained sieges that dragged on for years, when they responded with lightning speed to threats emerging from the empire's most distant frontiers, they did so backed by a logistical infrastructure that represented centuries of refinement and improvement. This network encompassed everything from the highways that crossed entire continents to the compact field hospitals where military surgeons saved lives using instruments that wouldn't be surpassed until well into the modern era. Every component of this machinery had been engineered to keep troops not merely alive, but in peak fighting condition, regardless of how far they found themselves from the heart of Rome. The very concept of military logistics, as we understand it today, traces its deepest origins to Roman innovations. While other ancient armies relied primarily on brute force, improvised plundering, or precarious supply lines that could be severed with ease, Rome developed a comprehensive understanding of warfare as a continuous process that began long before the first sword was drawn and continued long after the final victory trumpet sounded. This holistic vision forever transformed how the art of war was conceived. The Romans understood that sustaining an army in enemy territory demanded the same precision and planning required to construct an aqueduct or govern a province. It wasn't enough to win battles. It was essential to maintain troops in constant readiness, keeping them fed, equipped, healthy, and motivated during campaigns that could stretch across years. This military philosophy manifested in every aspect of their organization, from soldier selection and training to the construction of infrastructure that would endure for millennia. The difference between Roman success and their enemies' failures became evident when examining the consequences of neglecting these fundamental principles. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest men and member of the first triumvirate alongside Caesar and Pompey, learned this lesson in the cruelest possible manner when he led his legions against the Parthian Empire in 53 BC. His campaign, conceived with the typical arrogance of someone who had underestimated the importance of securing adequate supply lines in hostile desert territory, ended in the catastrophe of Carrhae, where over 20,000 Romans perished and another 10,000 were captured. The true lesson of that debacle resonated throughout Rome for generations. Without logistics, even the world's most powerful army becomes vulnerable. This understanding led the Romans to develop a supply system that operated simultaneously on multiple levels. During peacetime, a network of military warehouses called Horia stretched across the empire, strategically positioned in permanent camps, frontier cities, and major ports. These structures, whose ruins can still be admired in places like Ostia Antica or along the Rhine's banks, weren't simple storage facilities, but complex installations designed to preserve food for years, protecting it from moisture, rodents, and natural deterioration. The Horia stored the essential elements of the legionary diet, sufficient wheat to produce the bread that formed the dietary foundation of every Roman soldier, olive oil for cooking and maintaining leather equipment, diluted wine that served both as a safe beverage and disinfectant, salted meat for special occasions, and salt, that precious mineral that gave soldiers their salary its name. Additionally, these warehouses kept armor replacements, reserve weapons, tools for constructing fortifications, and basic medical supplies. But the true genius of the Roman system revealed itself when legions abandoned the safety of their permanent bases to venture forth on long-distance campaigns. Then the mobile supply systems came into operation, an itinerant logistics network that transformed each military column into a self-sufficient city on the move. Each marching legion carried not only its 6,000 infantry soldiers and auxiliaries, but also hundreds of specialized non-combatants, engineers to build bridges and temporary fortifications, physicians to treat the wounded, experienced veterans who knew the best routes and water sources, and even negotiation experts to obtain supplies from local populations. During the Second Punic War, when Hannibal threatened Rome's very existence after crossing the Alps with his Carthaginian army, the Roman logistical system demonstrated its effectiveness under extreme conditions. While Carthaginian military genius blazed in battles like Cannae, where he annihilated 2 Roman consular armies, Rome could endure precisely because its capacity to replace losses, re-equip troops, and maintain multiple armies in the field simultaneously far exceeded that of any other Mediterranean power. Fabius Maximus, nicknamed the Delayer, understood that victory wouldn't come from directly confronting Hannibal in pitched battles, but from gradually exhausting his resources while Rome kept its own supply lines intact. Overland transport formed the backbone of this entire logistical operation, and no element proved more crucial than the famous network of Roman roads. These weren't simply pathways, but genuine works of military engineering designed specifically to facilitate rapid movement of troops and supplies across continental distances. Built with multiple layers of crushed stone, sand, and perfectly fitted paving stones, these routes could support the weight of complete military columns, including the heavy wagons that transported siege engines and the most bulky supplies. Roman terrestrial logistics employed a carefully planned variety of pack animals, each selected for specific functions. Mules, valued for their endurance and ability to navigate difficult terrain, transported soldiers' personal supplies and the most delicate equipment. Horses, reserved primarily for cavalry and officers, also pulled light carts carrying urgent messages and medical supplies. Oxen, slower but incomparably strong, dragged the heaviest loads, dismantled catapults, prefabricated siege towers, and the enormous stone blocks necessary for constructing permanent fortifications. When legions found themselves in hostile or geographically challenging territory, Roman engineers demonstrated their mastery by constructing temporary infrastructure that rivaled permanent works. Wooden bridges that rose over rushing rivers in a matter of days, temporary fortresses that sprouted from nothing each night when troops made camp, improvised roads that crossed swamps and mountains, everything emerged with an efficiency that amazed both allies and enemies alike. An extraordinary example of this capability manifested during Germanicus's campaigns following the disaster at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, where 3 complete Roman legions had been annihilated by a coalition of Germanic tribes under Arminius's leadership. Germanicus, Tiberius's adopted nephew, and one of his generation's most capable generals, understood that avenging that humiliation would require impeccable logistics in one of the most hostile environments Rome had ever faced, the swampy forests and meandering rivers of Germania. His engineers constructed a network of temporary forts connected by plank roads that extended across kilometers of swampy terrain, allowing legions to move safely through territory where they had previously been vulnerable to ambushes. They established supply depots protected by fortifications at strategic points, ensuring troops never found themselves too far from fresh food and reinforcements. This temporary infrastructure, built and maintained while active military operations were underway, enabled Germanicus to recover 2 of the 3 legionary eagles lost by Varus, and demonstrate that Rome had learned the lessons of its previous disaster. Perhaps no aspect of Roman logistical genius proved as impressive as their mastery of naval logistics. The Mediterranean, which Romans called with justified pride Mare Nostrum, our sea, had become a liquid highway connecting every corner of the empire. Control of this body of water not only guaranteed commercial security, but provided the most efficient route for transporting the enormous volumes of grain, oil, wine, and manufactured materials necessary to sustain both legions and the empire's civilian population. Romans developed specialized types of vessels for different logistical functions: swift galleys for carrying urgent messages and high-ranking officials, massive cargo ships capable of transporting 1,000 tons of grain in a single voyage, and warships specifically designed to escort commercial convoys and project naval power in enemy-controlled waters. The grain ships that sailed between Alexandria and Ostia, Rome's port, were true floating giants for their era, comparable in cargo capacity to 18th century merchant vessels. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC offered a definitive demonstration of how naval logistical superiority could decide the fate of entire empires. When Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, confronted Mark Antony and Cleopatra in waters near Greece's western coast, victory wasn't determined solely by naval tactics or combatant valor. Octavian's fleet, commanded by the brilliant Admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, had been better supplied, its ships were in superior condition, its crews had received adequate nutrition, and its supply lines from Italy remained intact. In contrast, Antony and Cleopatra's fleet, though formidable in number and equipment, suffered from logistical problems that proved fatal. Their ships had been blockaded for months in the Ambracian Gulf, where food grew scarce, diseases spread among crews, and many vessels began showing signs of deterioration from inadequate maintenance. When the decisive battle was finally fought, these logistical factors weighed as heavily as any tactical maneuver in the final outcome that established Augustus as the sole master of the Mediterranean world. However, not all situations permitted dependence on supply lines established from Roman territory. When legions operated in remote or hostile regions, or when communication lines were threatened by enemies, one of Roman logistics' most risky but necessary practices came into play: foraging. This tactic involved obtaining supplies directly from enemy territory, reducing dependence on long and vulnerable convoys that could be intercepted or destroyed. Julius Caesar provided a masterful example of both foraging's benefits and risks during his final campaign against Vercingetorix at Gergovia in 52 BC. Facing a Gallic coalition that had adopted a scorched earth strategy, denying him access to usual local supplies, Caesar was forced to constantly divide his forces to seek grain and forage in an ever-widening radius around his positions. While this tactic initially allowed him to keep his legions fed in hostile territory, it also created opportunities that Vercingetorix brilliantly exploited, attacking these scattered parties and inflicting upon Caesar one of his few significant defeats in the entire Gallic Wars. Equally important, though often overlooked in historical narratives that focus on combat glories, was the Roman military medical system, an innovation that would have no parallel until the modern era. The valetudinaria, field hospitals established in every permanent legion camp, represented a revolutionary leap in military medical care that would save countless lives and allow experienced soldiers to return to active service rather than being discharged for wounds that would have been fatal in other armies. Each valetudinarium was a surprisingly sophisticated medical facility for its time. Built following principles of sanitary engineering that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 19th century, these hospitals featured advanced drainage systems, well-ventilated rooms to prevent disease spread, separate areas for different types of patients and wounded, and even primitive operating theaters where military surgeons performed operations requiring years of specialized training. During the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, when Caesar decisively confronted Pompey in the civil war that would determine the Roman Republic's future, the superiority of Caesar's medical system proved to be a crucial factor rarely mentioned in traditional accounts of that epic confrontation. Caesar's forces, veterans of Gallic campaigns and accustomed to logistical efficiency, developed during years of operations in hostile territory, not only fought with greater cohesion, but could also recover and reintegrate wounded soldiers with an effectiveness that significantly surpassed the medical capacity of Pompeian forces. Perhaps in no situation did the critical importance of Roman logistics become more evident than during prolonged sieges, those epic confrontations that could extend for months or even years, where victory depended as much on the ability to maintain a well-supplied besieging army as on the skill to deny resources to the besieged enemy. Rationing then became a complex art requiring balance between soldiers' basic nutritional needs and supply conservation for uncertain duration, while simultaneously maintaining troop morale facing the privations of an extended campaign. The Siege of Alesia in 52 BC offers the perfect example of how Caesar mastered both military and logistical aspects of complex siege operations. Facing Vercingetorix and 80,000 Gallic warriors fortified in the mountainous city of Alesia, Caesar understood that a direct assault would be too costly and probably unsuccessful. Instead, he decided to besiege the city, but realized that simply blockading Alesia wouldn't suffice. He needed to create a system that would allow him to maintain the siege even when Gallic relief armies arrived. Caesar's solution was a masterpiece of military engineering and logistical planning, constructing two concentric lines of fortifications. The inner line, called circumvallatio, completely surrounded Alesia and prevented defenders from leaving to seek supplies or attack the besiegers. The outer line, termed contravallatio, protected Roman forces against attacks from outside when Gallic relief armies arrived. Between these two lines, Caesar had effectively created a fortified corridor where his legions could operate with relative safety. Caesar had to feed 10 legions, approximately 50,000 men including auxiliaries, for an indefinite period in hostile territory where foraging had become extremely dangerous due to enemy forces throughout the surrounding region. The rationing system implemented by Caesar during the siege demonstrated his deep understanding of military psychology in addition to basic nutritional needs. He knew that hungry soldiers become not only physically weak, but also prone to demoralization, desertion, and indiscipline. When the massive Gallic relief army finally arrived, reported by sources as containing over 200,000 warriors, Roman logistics faced its severest test. Caesar found himself literally besieged by forces that outnumbered him by more than 3-1, while simultaneously maintaining his own siege of Alesia. The supply systems established by Caesar allowed his troops to maintain their combat effectiveness even when fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. The result was one of military history's most decisive victories, one that not only ended organized Gallic resistance, but also demonstrated the absolute superiority of the Roman logistical system over the more improvised methods employed by their enemies. Vercingetorix, the charismatic Gallic leader who had managed to unite Gallic tribes like no previous chief, was forced to surrender not because his warriors lacked courage or skill, but because they couldn't compete with the logistical machine that Caesar had perfected during a decade of conquests. Transporting heavy war machines for siege operations presented logistical challenges of an entirely different magnitude. The catapults, ballistae, mobile siege towers, and battering rams that formed a Roman legion's arsenal weren't simply weapons, but complex engineering machines requiring specialized transport, assembly by expert technicians, and constant maintenance to function effectively. A single medium-sized Roman catapult weighed over 2 tons when fully assembled, but transporting it as a complete unit was impossible across the roads and mountain paths legions frequently had to traverse. Therefore, these machines were manufactured in modular sections that could be transported by ox teams and then assembled on-site by specialized military engineers. The siege of Masada in 73 AD provides an extraordinary example of how Roman engineering and logistics worked together to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Masada, the fortress built by Herod the Great atop a rocky plateau rising over 400 meters above the Judean desert, seemed absolutely impregnable. Its walls rose above vertical cliffs, its defenders were well supplied with reserves accumulated over years, and any besieging army would have to operate in one of the Roman world's most hostile environments. When the 10th Legion Fretensis, commanded by Lucius Flavius Silva, arrived at Masada to eliminate this last bastion of Jewish resistance, following Jerusalem's destruction, they faced a challenge that would have defeated any less organized army. The solution was an impressive demonstration of both engineering and military logistics, constructing a colossal siege ramp that would extend from the mountain's base to the height of Masada's walls. This ramp, whose remains can still be seen today, required transporting hundreds of thousands of tons of stone and earth across the desert, as well as enormous quantities of timber to create support structures and working surfaces. The logistical challenges were extraordinary. Every piece of construction timber had to be transported from forests located hundreds of kilometers away. All water necessary for workers and pack animals had to be brought from distant sources, and food to maintain thousands of legionaries and auxiliary workers during months of arduous construction had to be transported regularly across desert territory, where a poorly protected caravan could easily be lost. Success at Masada represented the culmination of centuries of refinement in the art of Roman military logistics. The ramp, completed after months of grueling work, allowed Roman siege engines to reach the fortress walls, sealing the fate of the last Jewish rebels. But beyond its immediate military significance, Masada demonstrated that no position existed so remote, so well defended, or so apparently inaccessible that it could indefinitely resist the combination of Roman determination, superior engineering, and above all, impeccable logistics. The legacy of the Roman logistical system would extend far beyond the fall of the Western Empire. The techniques developed by Roman military engineers and administrators for moving, supplying, and maintaining large armies across vast distances would influence European military organization throughout the Middle Ages and beyond. The fundamental principles of logistical planning, military infrastructure construction, and resource administration that Rome perfected during centuries of conquests would become the foundation upon which all subsequent military systems would be built. The Roman roads themselves continued serving as Europe's main transport arteries for over 1,000 years after Rome's fall, and many of the principal routes connecting modern cities follow exactly the layouts established by imperial engineers 2 millennia ago. This physical durability symbolizes the conceptual durability of Roman logistical innovations, which demonstrated that true power resides not solely in the capacity to destroy, but in the ability to build, maintain, and sustain complex systems across time and distance. Roman logistics teaches us that behind every great civilization lies an invisible network of organization, planning, and execution that makes possible everything visible and dramatic. Battles may decide the fate of days or weeks, but it's logistical systems that determine the destiny of centuries. Rome understood this fundamental truth better than any previous civilization, and that understanding, as much as the valor of its legionaries or the brilliance of its generals, explains why the Roman eagle dominated the known world longer than any other symbol of power in human history.